Hi, Facebook or Twitch as well. Hi, Activiers. We're here today, me and Alex at Solidarity Live, to talk with Alex Cequea, world traveler and video producer who made I'm just going to call it the best viral video of the past month about systemic racism, breaking it down for people, and apparently had Ben Shapiro shooketh because it got bounced around a lot of the right wing media outlets as well.
I think that's a little narrow. Of the past month, I would say the best viral video of the last quarter, at least. I mean,
okay. I'm sorry. The best viral video,
maybe
in the world.
more in the world. Who wants to hear about the second best time you ever had? Superlative. Also, Snoop Dogg, LeBron, Kim Kardashian. We can get into it, but this video was shared everywhere. My one of my best friends, who we've known each other for over 20 years, he texted me to say that his wife, who works at Christie's, was shown this video in their company-wide training on racism on Thursday. Like, it's got so much penetration from the pop, social media and everything that big corporations are bringing it in to try to explain systemic racism. Don't undersell how.
Trying to undersell it? I was trying to not be braggadocious. Where is the line, Alex?
We have to find it. It's got to be somewhere in between me and you.
Okay, great. Well, do you want to watch the video? Can we?
I think we should. I think we should watch the video.
And again, you guys, you're about to see the best video of your life. So just remember this moment. It's a big deal.
This is Jamal. Jamal is a boy who lives in a poor neighborhood. He has a friend named Kevin who lives in a wealthy neighborhood. All of Jamal's neighbors are African American, and all of Kevin's neighbors are white. Because Jamal's school district is mostly funded by property taxes, his school is not very well funded. His classrooms are overcrowded, his teachers are underpaid, and he doesn't have access to high-quality tutors or extracurricular activities. Kevin's school district is also funded by property taxes, so his school is very well funded. His classrooms are never crowded, his teachers are very well paid, and he has access to high-quality tutors and lots of extracurricular activities. Kevin and Jamal live only a few streets away from each other. So how come they're growing up in such different worlds with such different opportunities for success? The answer has to do with America's history of systemic racism. To understand it better, let's look at what life was like for Kevin and Jamal's grandparents. Decades after the Civil War, many government agencies started to draw maps dividing cities into sections that were either desirable or undesirable for investment. This practice was called redlining, and it usually blocked off entire black neighborhoods from access to private and public investment. Banks and insurance companies used these maps for decades to deny black people loans and other services based purely on race. Historically speaking, owning a home and getting a college education is the easiest way for an American family to build wealth. But when Jamal's grandparents wanted to buy a house, the banks refused because they lived in a neighborhood that was redlined. So Jamal's grandparents were not able to buy a home, and because colleges could prevent them from attending through legal segregation, their options for higher education were really scarce. Kevin's grandparents, on the other hand, got a low-interest loan to buy their first house and got accepted into a handful of top universities, which traditionally only accepted white students. This opened up a wealth of opportunities that they were able to pass on to their kids and grandkids. Even as late as the 1980s, an investigation into the Atlanta real estate market showed that banks were more willing to lend to low-income white families than to middle or upper-income African-American families. As a result, today, for every $100 of wealth held by a white family, black families have $5.04. A 2017 study confirms that redlining is still affecting home values in major cities like Chicago today. This explains how Kevin and Jamal inherited vastly different circumstances. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. A big part of systemic racism is implicit bias. These are prejudices in society that people are not aware that they have. Let's go back to Kevin and Jamal. Against all odds, Jamal manages to be the only student from his high school to get accepted into a great university, the same one that Kevin and his high school friends are attending. But after Kevin and Jamal both graduate, Jamal notices that his resume isn't drawing as much interest as Kevin's, even though they graduated from the same program with the exact same GPA. Unfortunately for Jamal, studies showed that resumes with white-sounding names get twice as many callbacks as identical resumes with black-sounding names. Implicit bias is one of the reasons why the black unemployment rate is twice the rate of white unemployment, even among college graduates today. You can see evidence of systemic racism in every area of life. The disparities in family wealth, incarceration rates, political representation, and education are all examples of systemic racism. Unfortunately, the biggest challenge with systemic racism is that there's no single person or entity responsible for it, which makes it very hard to solve. So what can you do? The first thing you can do is work towards becoming more aware of your own implicit biases. What are some prejudices that you might hold that you're not aware of? Second, let's acknowledge that the consequences of slavery and Jim Crow laws are still affecting access to opportunity today. As a result, we should support systemic changes that create more equal opportunities for everyone. Increasing public school funding and making it independent from property taxes would be a great start so that poor and wealthy districts can receive equal access to resources. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. Luckily, we're all part of the system, which means that we all have a role to play in making it better. Peace.
Well, so we have Alex on with us, and I would love to hear from him both what went into creating that wonderful video and what it's like to watch Kim Kardashian retweet you.
I want to say that I think we should start with Snoop Dogg, but
okay, sure.
instead of Kim Kardashian. I'd also point out right before Alex joins us, just to sort of to set the stage, is your dulcet tones definitely have to have something to do with the tens of millions of views there, because you're explaining such a difficult topic that really shuts people down. It's actually one of the main challenges of addressing systemic racism, is it just people just shut down. And I do think that something that your video did is actually, it captures it in a non-threatening sort of way. It invites people into the discussion. And I do think that has, that's just a really well-produced explainer video. And so Alex, I'd love to hear about the process, and start with Snoop Dogg. You can end with Kim Kardashian, I think, but like if I were like, I think in terms of cultural importance, that would be the way that I would go, even if Kim Kardashian got you more eyeballs.
I love it. Well, first of all, thank you guys for having me and for being so nice about it and kind about this thing. It's so crazy. Like I make these things to try to help, so my initial reaction to all this is just that I'm grateful that I can create something that is useful to people and that people respond to it. Sometimes I create things that I think this is the greatest video I've ever made, and then like 100 people watch it and that's it, so you just never know like what people are going to resonate with. But in creating these type of content, and if there are any other content creators that are watching, the biggest challenge for these types of videos, especially hard topics, is finding some sort of narrative that is engaging and like you said, Alex, like it's not threatening or doesn't put people off. And so that's a really careful balance. And I would say the hardest thing with doing these types of videos is condensing really complex information into bite-sized pieces. Like one of my favorite quotes is, if I had more time, I would have written you a shorter letter. So like,
is that like who's that?
I think it's attributed to Mark Twain, but I don't know if it's
right,
actually
yeah.
from him. But yeah,
that's a really great saying. I mean, anyone who's ever written anything understands that the page limit, except in college where you're changing the margins to like expand it, in real life, the page limit is actually there and you have to cut down to it. And that is the process that's really difficult.
Right. I mean, one thing that you always have to be aware of is that everybody's attention spans is so small, right? And you're competing with anything else that can grab people's attention. So that's why I try to like, for me, it's like doing the cartoons is sort of a trick. Like I want to talk about these really important things, but I also know like bright colors attracts people, and like so it's a sometimes I feel like it's a little bit of a decoy. It's like here's this really friendly, fun animation, but we're gonna talk about some real serious shit. All right, like so yeah, that I would say that's sort of the hardest part is condensing the information and then making sure it's not something that people have an emotional rejection to, and there's a lot to that. There's a lot of tweaking that happens on the script to make sure that that happens. Um, and I'll tell you, I got an email recently, actually, from a young white man in I think it was like in Texas, and he said, I saw your video pop up a bunch of times on my timeline, and I was hesitant to watch it because I was like, oh man, this is gonna be like some like white bashing video. It's gonna be like terrible. But then I thought to myself, oh, I should be open minded about this, and let me just see what this is about. And then he told me, I watched it and I was like, oh my god, like I completely agree. Like this is a problem. Absolutely. Like I'm so glad that I even took this step, and it just serves as a little introduction. But what I want to say with that is that a lot of the success of viral things has to do with timing. And I feel like collectively in the country, it's just a good time for a lot of people to be receptive to these kinds of conversations. So I feel like this video, I put this video out a year ago, right? And so it just now taking off because it's timely, and it just happens to kind of coincide with where the conversation is at.
So this is not at all a deep question, but who was the first person? Like, because I remember this video. We've had it up on the page. Like, what was the first kickoff for it spreading through the culture sphere?
Yeah. So
Snoop, be Snoop. Come on.
Snoop, right? Yeah, yeah. I have a little story about that. But no, that apparently because our team is amazing and we have wonderful people working with us. Harry, our CEO, tracked down the way that it spread, and apparently it was a production company that was associated with Viola Davis, who first reposted her on Instagram, and then once Viola Davis saw it a few days later, she promoted it and put it up on Instagram, and then other celebrities started seeing it from her feed, and apparently it was Deborah Messing who had like a group chat with a bunch of other celebrities, like put it on the group chat and was like, hey, my friend Viola Davis just shared this, you all should share it too. And that's where it like blew up with other people. And then from there it jumped to Twitter, and the first big person on Twitter was Alyssa Milano. And I was literally, I'm in Barcelona, Spain, right? So I'm about 6 hours ahead of Eastern time. So it was like 2 a.m. here, and I was getting ready to go to bed, and my phone beeped. I was like, oh, like, okay, let me just see what this last thing is. And it was Alyssa Milano, who had just tagged me because she just posted the video. I was like, oh, I'm not sleeping for the next like 2 or 3 hours now. So yeah, it's crazy. With Snoop, when I saw that Snoop shared it, I just took a screenshot of it and I sent it to my mom and my stepdad, and I was like, okay, fam, I think I've officially made it. Like,
and Chuck D raised his fist in Snoop's comments when Snoop. I'm like, that is a powerful. So we at Social Security Works, we actually created the what became Cardi Bernie in many ways, because we raised up her interview about the New Deal and FDR, and we put a tweet out on it, and then Senator Sanders retweeted that, and then it started this whole Cardi B Bernie Sanders thing that actually became very influential. And it's just like, it's pretty amazing. I love that Harry was able to track down, in like a social media epidemiologist, the contact tracing of this.
For sure. And like my background is in digital marketing, so I like geek out on that stuff. Like I love that sort of knowing how things spread and what happens. And I've had things go viral before, but like never to this level. Like I've had things where it's like, oh, this got a lot of views, or like a lot of people are seeing this or whatever. But never like all of my feeds are full of people like tagging me or messaging me or being like, hey, so and so just shared your thing, or like, hey, I haven't talked to you in 10 years, but like, good job. Like, okay. Like, well, that's all right. Awesome. Yeah. So,
well, and I think it's a really good sign about where we are in the conversation about these things, that video specifically is what went viral, because it's not, like you said, it is brightly colored, which is great, but it is an important way of looking at the issue. It's not just this superficial, oh yeah, like we have all these exciting protests, bye. It is a video breaking down the systemic origins of how a lot of these tragedies play out in a more subtle way. I think that's great.
yeah, no, I think what was missing in the conversation, what inspired my desire to make a video about this, is that when I started looking for good sources online for systemic racism, you either have very simplified, like very narrow explanations of it, like this is systemic racism in terms of housing, and this is what's happening, or this is systemic racism in terms of health deserts or things like that, food deserts or things like that. But there was no sort of big overview, and the big overviews that did exist were like really long, like a 2-hour conversation from like a Harvard professor or something. So I was like, okay, I think there might be space here that would be useful for just like a quick primer, because it's pretty basic. But I really wanted to make sure people understood the chronological connection of all of these things and how things in the past affect what we live in now. Something like I had in the video, the property value maps of a city like Chicago. You can overlay them exactly on top of old redlining maps, and redlining has been illegal for 30 plus years, right? And so like the past affects us today, and that's a big counterpoint to a lot of right-wing talking points that say, oh, none of the stuff is legal anymore, so therefore there's no problem.
It's really crazy. You look at the feeds, because I've been looking at the feeds of people like Ben Shapiro and Candace Owen. Like, I'm really curious how they get out of these conversations. And it really does come down to just a complete willingness to not talk about facts. Like, they're like, slavery was forever ago. Liberals just want you to feel like a victim. It's like, okay, great.
Yeah.
Then how do you explain, all these systemic issues, all these murders at the hands of police, and they just don't, nothing.
Yeah. So I saw two kinds of responses from right-wing people, and one of them was Charlie Kirk. He used one kind, and then Ben Shapiro used another. So Charlie Kirk just went straight misinformation, just went straight ignoring the video. He literally would pause it right before I would talk about all the data and show the charts and all of that. He would like literally pause it and then look at the camera and say, he shows no data about this. There is no data, like it was just totally like, you could not take that seriously. And then you have Ben Shapiro, who is, I guess an intellectual. I guess that's what he calls himself. I mean,
that's more. He's definitely the type dude who gave himself his own nickname, right? Like that is. So I'm sure he calls himself an intellectual, but no. That is a man who dances to somebody else's tune right there.
It's crazy. Like, he basically took another approach, which was, let me just talk really fast and get really granular. So granular.
Can I just because it's like that you just said it. That's his whole shtick. It's like a squirrel on meth. It's like a squirrel that found a bag of meth in a city park, ate it, and then got in front of a camera somehow. I mean, it literally looks like they speed him up, and you're like, just because you're talking really fast does not mean that you're saying anything at all useful.
Right.
So that's his shtick, right?
He just kind of launches on this tirades, and for people that are not really well informed, it sounds like he knows what he's talking about. But also he just gets real, like he just gets really granular. I don't know how else to explain it. Like, for example, he the Harvard study that I mentioned in the video about that shows that somebody with a black sounding name on a resume gets half as many callbacks as someone with a white sounding name, even if it's similar. He said that study was evidence of classism, not evidence of racism. It was like, okay, yeah, but like, where does the classism come from? Like, like, I feel like that's his whole thing. He just dives so deep into the thing where if you say like, oh, this is a cup, he'll be like, well, but the molecules, like if you look at the collection of molecules.
It is it's a vessel. It's actually a vessel, and therefore you're wrong. It's derailing pedantic bullshit is what it is. And if you've ever dealt with anyone like him, he's one of the dumbest tropes in the conservative land. They literally just take some 12-year-old kid. They find whatever 12-year-old kid there is who's wearing Dockers and boat shoes and being like, actually, the tax rate is too high on, right? Like, and then they're like, this kid is a wonderkind. He's such an intellectual. And then because there's literally only one of them in a whole school and everyone else is like, you're an asshole. They take that one and they actually prop him up and they put him in front of rooms and they're like, look at this celebrity wonderkind. And then when he ages out of it, they just toss him aside, find the other 12-year-old in Dockers. And I mean, like, Shapiro's the last one to know that his billionaire backers are going to toss him aside when the squirrel on meth shtick wears thin. Jocelyn, can I tell a Charlie Kirk story? It's a little bit mean, but
yes, of course.
So I was in the green room. I went up against him on Fox in the morning, and so it's like 5 a.m, and it's an eerie time on Fox News, and people should watch me and tell me what you think. But I definitely destroyed.
Were you in the same room? Were you
in the green room? Yes, and then in the studio. We were in the box. And there's a whole story there, but I really think this is important to know about Charlie Kirk, like how like developed he is, because your explanation of him was pretty good as well. Remembering that he's the dude who runs Turning Points USA. Again, he's just concocted. They find the other 12-year-old who's not quite as precocious as Ben Shapiro, and they create this thing, and they're like, there's a conservative movement of young people. I promise you there are. Look, there's like 4 in the school, and they fund it. And that's the thing. That's what they do. But so Charlie Kirk comes in. He's bleeding out of a shaving. He's cut himself shaving. And he has no idea what to do from cutting himself shaving. So he's actually yelling at the makeup people to just put cake makeup on a razor cut. And I'm like, what are you, 11? I'm like, what? You don't know what to do when you cut yourself shaving, and then your response is to yell at the makeup person. So anyways, I was like, just grab some of that hand sanitizer and rub it right in there. It'll close it right up. So he did. And then he tried to argue that, people on Medicare people on Medicaid are takers. And I explained to him that he's just not correct. I wanted to tell the 2 tropes because that's what you were attacked with. Your facts were attacked with the 2 sides of the conservative machine. It's a misinformation machine. Pedantic, derailing bullshit, right? Like, hey, look, you put the comma in the wrong place. That means all of your arguments are wrong. And then the bulldozer, which is just like, hey, this is stupid. He's just a liberal snowflake and da 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 da. So I would take that as a high mark of success that you had both sides aimed at you, to say that your video was wrong.
Well, I appreciated that at least Ben Shapiro played the whole video. Like he played the video and would pause it and do his thing, but like he's educating his audience. I'm sure at least some percentage of them went, "Shit, I didn't know that." You know. So like, I was like, "Oh, this is great."
I mean, it's really interesting to me about because what interested me about that type of conservative is I just want to know what motivates them. And I think that is something, especially if you're talking about a Candace Owen or someone who is literally selling out their own. There's always a financial element. It's like you said, Alex, somebody is funding these people. Somebody like this is not like us where, oh, we had these progressive ideals and then we started to pursue talking about those things because we believe in them. These are people who are paid to say the things they say. And that's a dynamic that I think is missed when people call Ben Shapiro an intellectual. Like, intellectual of what? How did he specifically get here, Alex Lawson? Do you know? Were you, because he's been around as long as I can remember.
What I was telling the truth. He was a wonderkind. He was
Wasn't like an example. That's actually exactly what
you can Google it. They literally found, they're like, this kid wears Dockers and boat shoes, or maybe it's a seersucker suit in the summer. You know, I don't know what the exact raising the flag of being a young conservative is. Probably not having empathy, but that's his pathway in. And I actually want to say, and to Alex Cequea, just toss it over to you on this. I will. So I like to make fun of them a little bit because they deserve it, because they're, bowing to power. But power and money, and this is to Jocelyn's question that's behind them, it knows what it's doing, right? Like, to do what we're doing, like you have to grind out, and it's hard, and you're working, and like there's no funding for it, right? Like, you gotta and on the greedy liars on Wall Street side, they basically dangle a bag of money in front of people, and they're like, hey, you can have a job forever. All you have to do is believe these things. And there is a libertarian conservative welfare system that will cover someone from college to grave, as long as they always repeat the same lies in the face of whatever, right? Like, that's their job. So that's what Jocelyn's going to close this out after this one, but just the truth to power that you're doing with your videos. Just speak just a little bit about sort of what brought you there, because it's not an easy place to find hey, I want to make videos that are impactful, speak truth to power. And how did you do that?
Well, thanks for that question too. I appreciate that framing of what I do. I like I was saying, I did digital marketing before. I had a corporate job doing marketing, and before that I was doing startup for a magazine as an editor. So it was always this mixture of I'm writing, I'm telling stories, I'm doing content marketing things, I'm figuring out how can I get my narrative seen by as many people as possible. And in college I studied business and sustainability, so I always wanted to go back. I always wanted to go back to doing something that had more lasting meaning. And so while I was at my corporate job, bored out of my mind, one of the days, and actually most days that I was there, I decided what would be a good vehicle for me to do this. And I always liked doing short PowerPoint presentations on. That's how nerdy I am. About
that is pretty nerdy.
Yeah,
good work.
I would do them for fun, just because
that's super nerdy. I mean,
yeah, exactly. In my
level.
teens, whole other story. I was born in the States, but my family is from Venezuela, so I would go visit them over the summer, but they wouldn't have internet. there in this. So, and over the summer, I would spend a whole summer with no internet, but they had PowerPoint and they had all these things on the computer. So I'm like, I'm just gonna create presentations, and I have smaller brothers, so I would literally just make fun stories for them,
Wow.
And so I always like that kind of medium, and I like the short storytelling format. I thought, how can I marry all these things together? I actually literally had a sat down with a piece of paper and thought, where are all my skills and where can I add the most value where they kind of converge? And I'm like, I like the digital marketing thing of the strategizing of how to get things seen. I like the storytelling. I have a passion for social causes. Let me try to marry all these things together. And that's how the idea came for animation. And I literally just taught myself how to do all the animation stuff. Like hundreds of hours of YouTube tutorials.
Okay, I
So,
love that story.
Whoa. That's
yeah.
really inspiring. I didn't know that story.
Yeah, that's how I started. And then I started doing them on my own while I was still at my corporate job until I quit my corporate job and then was just doing consulting, trying to figure out how could I end up making these videos for a living. And this is how I ended up hooking up with the Act.tv team, because some of my videos started getting really big traction. And then Sandy from the team was like, "Hey, we would love to have somebody do this in our team. Like, do you know anybody? Like, are you?" And I was like, I'm available. I'm available right now. Let's do this."
That's
And so
amazing.
that's how I ended up with you guys, with the team. So
That's a beautiful origin story.
thank you.
And now you and Snoop Dogg are like best friends.
We just hang out now, me and Snoop and Kim Kardashian. Yeah, just
I am gonna baselessly say he's gonna narrate your next video. That's my. That's what I believe.
I love it. I'm gonna have to change my script a little bit, make it a little more, make it rhyme a little bit better.
Well, so what are you working on next? I know you always have a bunch of project ideas.
Yeah, so because I made this video a year ago, when it started getting popular, I thought, man, I really wish it had something on there specifically about police violence, because that has its own history and context, right? And with all of the response that we got internally, we thought, it'd be good to do a follow-up as soon as possible. So right now I'm doing that video. I already have the script ready. I'm going to start animating it. But it's basically the racial history of police violence. And the basic gist of it is that throughout pretty much all of American history, the Black community in the United States has never had a reason to trust the police. So
yes.
So then when you have that context, and then you see somebody get pulled over who is a Black man or woman, then you can understand the distrust, the nervousness, it's not their, from their point of view, they've never been there to help. So why would they, cooperate or feel like this is a organization that serves them? So, yeah.
Well, and I think it's really important because I have learned so much these past couple weeks, and I wasn't, none of these issues for anyone on this call and probably anyone watching, none of these issues are news. And yet the more you educate yourself, the more you learn. I was just reading an article this morning before I hopped on with you guys. I did not realize the reality of lynchings in the South were not just okay, they were not just encouraged, they were public carnival things.
Yeah.
I think I thought these things were happening. Yes, people knew they were happening. No, people would bring their children to watch Black men get tortured. This is so endemic to our history, not only as a country, but like you said, of law enforcement. These things were done by the police. And we wonder why it's still happening.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of times the police just didn't do anything. They would turn a blind eye or sometimes participate in some way. But you can literally see, in doing my research for this video, you can literally see maps of the exodus that happened from the South. Because that's just terrorizing an entire community, right? So people try to leave as soon as they possibly could. So if you look at the Black populations, the percentage of Black people living in major cities from 1910 and compare it to 1970, you have like Chicago, maybe 2% Black people lived there in 1910, and then by 1970 it was like 30%. Like just this massive like spikes because people just kind of fled. And then once people flee, and then you have segregation happening, then the police are the ones that need to enforce segregation. So then you end up with a situation where Black community has never had a reason to trust the police or feel like they are actually there to protect and serve.
Well, yeah, I really look forward to this video, Alex. I think it'll do a lot of good because it is, we have so many people, myself included, who are overly tempted to write master's theses about this on Facebook, and it's like, all right, like that's not that's not what we need right now. We need your soothing voice in the cartoons and like, oh, am I educating myself right now? I didn't even realize it. So please make many, many videos.
I will try.
Where can people find you on Twitter and all that?
Just at my name for Twitter is probably the best place to find me. Yeah.
Awesome.
And then I always post my videos there. So
nice.
Alex, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you guys. You guys
Can't
are
wait
awesome.
to see the next video.
For sure. Thank you.
Bye.
I really love the PowerPoint story, Jocelyn. That was the best.
Yeah, I think that he should do career counseling too. Help people like find their way in the movement. Because that's a thing I really think that I hope we talk about moving forward after this week is like, okay, it's one thing to be upset. I saw a meme today, like last week wasn't Black Lives Matter Spirit Week. It's an organizing movement. Now we have to go forth and do probably the things that are slightly less exciting than attending all these protests. So, how do we galvanize that energy, Alex? Like that is a thing I think about constantly because you want to be productive.
Solidarity.
Oh, that's right. Sorry.
Now I think it's an important question. I have a sort of I don't know. I put down some people have really strong opinions about politics every 4 years. I call them people who pay attention every 4 years. I try to go really basic in my messaging.
That's a really catchy nickname. I like it.
Because the truth is that, like corporate lobbyists, for example, they pay attention every other day besides election day. That's when they're working. Yes. And they don't care who wins on election day. Like they care some, they pour tons of money, but they have a plan for whatever. And they never just rest on their laurels thinking that, somebody else is going to deliver them the corruption that they've paid for. They make sure that those politicians they buy deliver. So I think the key is it's the dulcet tones. We have to be Alex Cequea and be inviting to people and understand the different levels of engagement that exist. Yes. Not everybody, very few people can stay engaged at the level of last week for a really long time. And, I think a lot of people know it's not a marathon. I mean, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. But in activism, I think it's more important to realize that it's a relay race. It's not a marathon.
Yes.
So you got to pass the baton and take a rest because burnout is actually the main thing that hurts the movement. And it's thrown at us by the power, apathy, you can't change anything. And then it's like, oh, I tried and I failed. We need to engage people to do what they can when they can and invite them to be part of the movement for justice and in ways that aren't lecturing them and hectoring them, and you didn't get everything right, so you're wrong. We have to embrace and solidarity. It's literally why we do this show. That is what the concept is. Standing in solidarity with someone does not mean that you are a copy of them. It does not mean that you agree on everything. Show me two people who agree on everything and I'll show you one idiot. That's a saying that really speaks to me. Like, it's not about agreeing on everything. It's about standing in solidarity on the things that we do agree on. And that is the movement that we need to build.
Well, and that's a problem. I mean, I've seen this a lot on newly woke white Facebook, where it's like, let me tell you exactly how to be an activist. And honestly, especially with Black issues, first of all, we need to listen to Black people, one, and not add to the inevitable burnout that people are going to already experience by micro managing people. I mean, obviously there are the big things, right? Like, don't be racist. There are certain words you should not use. Those are all really big and we can all agree on that. But I've seen some weird stuff on Facebook, unless you've read this book, are you really an ally? Come on. I mean, we're already getting that from the establishment. And, I think you and I can both say we have been doing this stuff for over a decade. And I think for people who are...
I'm old, Jocelyn. I've been doing it for longer than that.
Aren't you like 30? How old are you?
I'm 40. You got to add another decade on.
Okay, one more decade. I was one decade off. Sorry. All I'm saying is
I agree. And I think, something I learned a couple great things from Marion Barry, who was the former mayor of Washington, D.C. I was organizing in Southeast Washington, D.C., where my radio station is, We Act Radio, Kimon and I's radio station. And that reminded me, I forgot to say the name of the book on our last show, so I've brought it to this show so for everyone who's waited with bating breath for that. But when I was organizing in Southeast, Marion Barry told me I was organizing with Kimon on HIV policy in Washington, D.C. And it is it's a difficult issue to organize on. Doesn't have a lot of like pickup. So, but we kept pushing and pushing, and we had some big wins, like free condom distribution in DC, and needle exchange, and harm reduction programs, the removal of a budget rider. And then there was a lot of people that were coming with us, and they weren't always with us though. And there's sort of an activist-y tendency, I think, from I think now, you said the woke circles, that side of things, to yell at people like, oh, you weren't always with us and now you're just with us when it's... And Marion Barry said, don't punch an ally in the face when they're walking towards you.
Yes.
And I was like, that's so smart. And he also critiqued that too often on the left, we literally turn to the person who's closest to us and punch them in the face just because they're closest to us.
Yes.
And all of this is violent imagery of political organizing. What he meant there, Marion Barry, who was the former mayor of DC and also marched at the right hand of MLK, and got his head bashed in by, racist cops across the South. And then Eleanor Holmes Norton would come in and start the legal process, just as a little bit of education history of people who don't know who Marion Barry is. That is something that solidarity can actually try. We have to rip away that tendency that I think actually comes from... a lot of it's learned in college, I think. And it's a little bit of like flag raising. And it's the opposite of solidarity. The person standing closest to you, you're not going to agree with everything on them, but you certainly are on the same side of the barricades against,
Yes.
the cops shooting tear gas at you.
Oh my God. I made a post like this about how, look, you're going to be tempted when you radicalize to disagree with everyone in the same way and get really aggressive with people. And the point I made was like, look, if you're dealing with someone who is mostly on your side, that's actually the time to be as diplomatic and wonderful as possible. I had someone comment on my post, well, I find those people to be more frustrating than the outright villains. And I almost lost my shit because I was like, the person that occasionally uses the wrong buzzword should not be more frustrating to you than the cops that are literally shooting people. If you literally are more frustrated by like someone who occasionally says the wrong thing or has the wrong ideas about things than you are by people who are literally murdering people, you really need to like figure out why you're in these conversations. And I think the problem is sometimes, especially as Caucasians, we can become more interested in telegraphing like our activist street cred than actually doing the work to create a more just society. And that's a problem. Do you run into this?
It is a problem. Anyone who works on the left runs into this. And I think there is, like the sort of like obvious version of it, which is very mockable and everything. But there's also a like sort of more nuanced but more deadly version of it, which is also that solidarity fixes, as long as I'm going to drive it into people's brains that they have to I'm going to say something, but then I'm going to think solidarity. And then I'm going to wonder, without it, there's no way to address systemic racism, like what Cequea's video is about. There is no way to change the system that is actually perpetrating this violence onto the people, as long as we are segregated into these little silos and we self-silo so that, oh, well, I care about this issue and you care about that issue, and we aren't working in solidarity together because we're like, well, you don't actually agree enough on my thing, da 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 da. Well, the bosses learned that tactic thousands of years ago. Right? They just dangle a little bit in front of everyone so that the people are split. And then it's super easy to ignore one voice. It's little harder, but still quite easy to ignore 1,000 voices. So if you can split up 100,000 people into 1,000 little buckets with 1,000 little angles, then you can ignore them. And the system continues to bulldoze on, but only when we realize that the person standing closest to us is not going to be a mirror image of us or a copy of us. We might not even like them, but we can stand in common cause in a united front, and we have to, in the face of literal fascism. I mean, Tom Cotton, literal fascism.
I think that sometimes people forget that politics aren't identity milestones. These aren't like, oh, like I'm this type of person, so I vote liberal and I'm this astrology sign. Like, no, these are policy decisions that have life and death implication for many people, probably you included, especially when it comes to things like war and healthcare that affect all of us. But when you're talking about issues of race, like, yeah, no, it's saying the wrong thing on social media a little bit is not the same thing as beating the shit out of a black man. Like, these are not equal sins. And until we really realize that, like you said, Alex, we need to all come together. And that doesn't mean you waste all your time trying to convert people who can't be converted. It means we're more powerful when we stand together than when we stand apart. Look what happened last week. I mean, it was incredibly powerful to see these protests get bigger and bigger every single day. The more they tear gas protesters, the more people came out. That's kind of incredible.
Yeah, and it was a crowd. I mean, it was primarily young people, so we need to work on that intergenerational solidarity. But Social Security works. We're working on it. Jocelyn, I know you're working on it. We need everyone to work on it. It's not old against young. it is actually still the billionaires on Wall Street versus all of us. It's the ruling class. And they will use whatever they can to slice and dice us up. You can't fight for economic justice if you're not fighting for racial justice. It's impossible. You can't be fighting like that Ben Shapiro squirrel on meth analysis. Oh, it's not actually racism, it's classism. That's the classic derailing technique. And then you do find too many people on the left will fall for it, and they'll be like, actually, he's got a point. And then they're like spinning off. You're like, all at the same time. If the boot is on somebody's neck and you're okay with it, at some point you're going to wake up and it's going to be on your neck. No matter how much you lick it, it will be on your neck, because as long as the bosses can keep somebody down, they can keep everybody down.
Yes.
And that is what solidarity is about, is understanding the shared humanity and a belief in the shared worth and dignity of everybody, and finding that and working with that to challenge the power structures which find zero worth and dignity in people. They only find monetary value, which they want to extract from us.
Yes. And I mean, literally, I love what you just said. It is the case that the boot should be on nobody's neck. And it's crazy how weeks like last one and many other weeks, you see so many people on the internets trying to make the argument, well, if you do the right thing, the boot won't come for you. It's not true. It's not true. Oppressive systems are premised on oppression, and they're going to find someone to oppress, whether or not they broke the law or went to college or whatever else. It's weird. It's a weird form of political Stockholm syndrome that I personally don't understand, because I do not want to get murdered or brutalized. I know it's an unpopular opinion, but do you share that, Alex?
Yeah, I do. I understand, and we are talking serious issues, try to keep it light and engaging and everything, and we do have a sharp take on things because there are fascists. But I will say, I understand also it's fear. That's what people are afraid of. They're afraid of the boot on their neck. They're wishing, oh, well, it's not for me. It's for, right? It's those people over there. And we're hit with all this propaganda all the time that is splitting us from each other, from community, away from a shared community, into these little sliced and diced silos, so that we can't find the common humanity among us. And the only places where there's like really where the bosses allow community is in community that is almost solely focused on othering, on making other people like you're the bad guy, and that kind of community is allowed, but not people coming together to just sort of understand our shared humanity.
And that's, I mean, I'm really glad we're talking about white privilege, like really glad. But I was talking to my best friend about this, and she was like, something about it rubs me the wrong way. And I think it's the element of pity, and she's Black. And she was like, I don't want these, like, I'm not an oppressed victim or whatever. Like, these conversations are supposed to draw us closer together. It's not supposed to create this weird savior saved dynamic between white people and Black people, or rich people and poor people. It's why charity does not fix classism. The goal is not to have nice rich people who give their money away. The goal is not to have good white people who fight for injustice. The goal is that the injustice itself is stopped. And until we get to that point, we're still going to be having, crazy conversations about fascist Tangerine, who should have never been elected. And yet here we are. Oh, I'm sorry, Alex. I just realized it's 4:00.
I really enjoyed this the show. I love Cequea's video.
Me too.
And I think what I really love about it, because I'm a nerd, as well is that he does get to that these are policy choices that are historical. You can analyze them and find that we made choices as a people, who the GI Bill would benefit, who the Farm Bill would benefit, who these government systems would benefit, that still reverberate down to today and cause a bunch of most of the social upheavals we see today. The upward redistribution of wealth is a choice. And the reason I'm saying all this to close this episode of Solidarity Live is that it's a choice. We can choose to go another path. And we are at that moment. We are at that moment where the question is raised and we have to answer, is it barbarism or is it shared humanity? That's the choice that's before us. We have a fork in the road. If you have not been paying attention, I don't even know, you cannot be paying attention and recognize we're at a fork in the road of history right now. And down one path is what we have now, where all of the benefits, all of the riches, all of the safety, and all of the humanity is accrued to a very small group of people. They're the only ones who matter, and everyone else doesn't matter. And then down the other path is one where we have a shared humanity. Everybody actually counts. Everybody has worth and dignity. The system is set up to make the people work together better, not to extract wealth from the people for this very small sliver of society. And the thing I'd sort of end on is we've faced this choice before. We've seen this before. And I do have faith that we will rise to this challenge. We will choose the path forward that says we all matter. We all count. And it's the systems that we are talking about changing. And it's not a judgment on you. It's not a judgment on your accomplishments. It's a judgment on the system that has been created. And we need to create a different system. And Jocelyn, how do we create that different system?
Is it solidarity?
It is solidarity. It's always solidarity. Wow. Because once we recognize that we stand together and our voices together cannot be ignored, that's when we start demanding a system that's accountable to you and me and to all of us, and not to a small handful of greedy liars on Wall Street. So thank you all on Social Security Works, Act TV, We Act Radio, and all across the interwebs for joining us here on Solidarity Live. We'll see you again next week. Have a wonderful weekend, and solidarity forever.